Before we dive in, a quick note. If you want weekly tools to grow and lead your business, sign up for my free newsletter at stevebreda.com/newsletter. Hi everyone, Steve Breda here with the Management Blueprint podcast, and my guest today is Sheehan, the CEO of Project Omega, an advanced nuclear recycling company with a mission to rebuild America's nuclear fuel cycle end-to-end and unlock a new era of energy abundance for the United States. Wow, what a mission. Welcome to the show, Stav.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. Great to be here.
Wow, you really are not playing small. Nuclear fuel cycle and rebuild it, and new era of energy abundance. So tell me about your personal why and how are you manifesting this in the business?
Well, so I've been working in the energy industry or adjacent to the energy industry for a long time. You know, this is the fourth business that I've kicked off. Prior to this, I was in sustainable fuels. Prior to that, I was in metals and hydrogen. Prior to that, I did a PhD in chemical physics. And then before that, I was in software, but it was in something that was energy intensive. So I've always been focused on, how can we improve the energy industry in the United States? And, more recently, especially, that's become more and more intersected with national security. So I would say for the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time on not just energy, but also national security. And right at the intersection of energy and national security is the nuclear industry. And in the last year, I would say, especially the last year, since we had 4 executive orders on nuclear power that were signed and let out into the world, I've been focused on the nuclear industry. So this has been the resurgence of nuclear in the United States for the last year and change.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. So the stupid question, why is this important?
Well, now I think we're learning, and we're having an acute learning experience, especially in the United States, that energy is a key bottleneck. And I think the thing that woke us up to that in a lot of ways is AI and the need for compute. But it's not been only AI. We've been exporting manufacturing. We've been exporting a lot of things from the United States that rely on electricity or rely on energy in one way or another. Our exporting of that has caught up to us. And we now have to reshore a lot of things that maybe in the 80s and the 90s, we decided to export out to China, for example. Now that we've realized that was not the greatest idea, we now are realizing that we need the energy to power it. And so energy has become a key talking point, and the infrastructure behind energy has become a key talking point, especially in the United States. And people's electricity prices have gone up. So not just industry and not just, the folks who are building AI and data centers. It's really everybody is now feeling the pain of our energy crunch. And it's crunched a little bit now. And I think people see that also because of what's going on in the Middle East and the high price of gas. But the crunch is continuing on because we know we have a high energy demand for all of the AI build out that we've been doing for the last handful of years.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I remember in the 1990s, there was this phenomenon that actually the energy demand was falling, at least in Europe, where I come from. And there was overcapacity and there was approval of overbuilding of capacity. And the discussion was, okay, why do we need this? How do we slow this down? And now the opposite thing is happening, which is pretty fascinating.
There's a big question as to how idle assets are used, right? Because a lot of people don't understand how electrical grids work. Everywhere in the world, energy is pretty much generated as you use it. So the energy that we're using to talk on this podcast is being generated by, depending on where you are located in the United States, but, for my location, it's probably being generated by a natural gas power plant because it's 2:10 in the afternoon. And, this is around the time when a lot of natural gas peakers start to get going. Depending on where you're calling in from, those electrons are being generated like live as we're speaking. There's not storage on the grid. We don't really have a lot of, we have some storage on the grid. California, they use pump hydro. They're building battery infrastructure in places like Texas, but they're not quite there yet. But grids don't operate by you just make the energy and then you use it later. No, grids operate by putting energy into the grid as grid demand is increasing. And so the energy that you use is being generated live. You have to think about it that way. And, historically, back in the 80s and the 90s, there were not a lot of sinks for that live energy that was being generated. And people were really also bad at predicting. Another thing that happened in the 80s and the 90s, as I said just right before, is that we were outsourcing a lot of our manufacturing to China. So China was building energy capacity because they saw all this manufacturing demand coming in. Mm-hmm. Their cost of labor was cheaper than what you guys had in Europe and what we had in the United States. Robotics was not a thing. So everything was pretty manual. And the energy was not being needed. Like, it was needed. It was just Europe and the US were outsourcing. And so we didn't have the need for the energy here because we were sending all the jobs over to Far East, really. They needed the energy there. So they built a bunch of coal-fired power plants. They built a lot of energy when those conversations that were happening in Europe, when they were going on. And now I think that we've realized that that's a mistake to just kind of outsource a lot of things and outsource your energy generation as well, and find ways of either storing energy or converting that energy and, using it usefully. So rather than storing it, you could convert it into chemical products. You could convert it into a variety of different things. I think we've learned better since the 80s and the 90s. And I think that ties into that original learning experience of don't outsource everything. You need to learn how to be self-sufficient.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't outsource your key competencies and your key resources. And energy is clearly one of those. Just a quick side question. How much of the energy is being wasted because it's not being able to be stored?
It depends on where you are. A lot of energy gets wasted in places where you have like high hydroelectric utilization, but the cost to produce is very cheap because hydro is, it's indirect solar. The water evaporates, comes down, and it's very dependent on the landscape where you can deploy hydroelectric. In other places where you have power plants that follow loads, like natural gas, for example, then you're probably not wasting quite as many electrons as you are in places where you could potentially overproduce. But I think we're generally pretty efficient. We don't waste too much. And a lot of that is because of the way grids work, where, we predict how much electricity is needed and we ramp up and ramp down as required.
Okay, let's talk about frameworks that you may have in your business. So this podcast is about frameworks, the processes that are maybe unique to your business, or you discovered it as you were building your business. Anything comes to mind that can be explained in 3 to 5 steps or approaches or perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, I guess learnings that I've had over all of my businesses, I think the first learning is hire the right people. And so, as a CEO, you have to spend an inordinate amount of your time on hiring and recruiting and finding the right people. It's super important to make sure that you have the best team. So that was my number one job when I started Project Omega, was to hire the best possible team that I could hire. And that was really, like, I told my investors that your first KPI is build the best C-suite that you can. And I think I did that. I have a really incredible team of folks at Project Omega who are subject area experts in the parts of the business that they lead. And so, really happy with how I did it in this business. I've had stumbling blocks in prior businesses, and, that's how you learn. You call them learning experiences for a reason. My biggest stumbling block in a prior business, my prior company, was investors. I didn't do proper due diligence on investors. There's ongoing litigation that I'm a part of that, has to do with investors that you may not know where their money comes from. Mm-hmm. I think the number 2 thing is make sure that you do a lot of diligence on who's backing you. Investors do diligence on founders, but founders don't do quite as much diligence on the investors. Mm-hmm. And we need to flip that narrative. It's especially true in national security. In national security, you have to be very, very sensitive to foreign actors. And, this, again, was the issue that I ran into in my last business. You can't accept money from people who have significant backing from groups that are adversarial to the United States. Yeah. A lot of those groups, they're U.S.-based funds. They're not foreign funds, but they just get their money from places that are foreign sources. And you have to be very careful about that when you're in the national security world. It may not be as important if you're making like a consumer app, but if you're doing things in energy and you're doing things in national security, those are places where those people could seriously cause problems for your business down the line. Yeah. And it comes out years after they invest in you. It's not like, they don't invest in you and then meddle around, 2 days later. All of these groups, including our adversaries to the United States, they're playing the long game. It's not a next week thing. Yeah. It's a several years from now thing.
Interesting. Okay. So that's good advice. So build the best C-suite you can and make sure you do your due diligence on your investors. What's the next important lesson that you learned about building a business?
Focus on execution. Execution is the challenge. I think a lot of businesses out there that exist on paper, and when you are a hardware company, that's not the way to do things. And I think that there are a lot of on-paper businesses that have, for better or for worse, some of them have been very successful. Some of them have had IPOs and, SPACs and things like that. There are businesses that exist on paper, at least in the nuclear industry and in the energy industry and in the fuels industries, that have gone very far for on-paper businesses, But I think a very large portion of those, and I haven't done all the statistics, but I'm sure that Claude could do it, or Grok, or GPT. A lot of those businesses don't do very well because they don't have any actual experience building things in the real world. And so I think that it's extremely important to execute, to get steel in the ground, and to focus on actually building things when you're in the hardware space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, in software, that's a little bit different. So it depends on if you're running a hardware or a software business. In software, you may be able to keep going for a lot longer without a product or without having things in market because you're building something that you know is going to have a huge splash when it comes out. But that's not necessarily the way that hardware businesses are able to be put together.
So give me an example of a business that's on paper and not in the real world.
Sorry, well,
a hypothetical example.
Like a hypothetical example would be a business that has put together a number of contracts and put together a number of, I would say, like marketing materials, about what they're going to do, but have never actually gone out and done it. And whether or not that's at the small scale, so in the lab scale, or that's something that's, on a larger scale. My business, we're very public about this. There's photographs of stuff and things like that of our lab, out there. My business is at the lab scale. We're working on going up to the pilot scale right now. So that's like grams and kilograms of material. We're not recycling metric tons of nuclear material. No business is doing that in the Western world except one in France. So no business is doing that in the United States currently. But we're public about where we are and what scale we're at. A lot of businesses out there say they're going to go out and, operate XYZ widget, let's say, and get a lot of traction around that before they've actually operated any sort of widget. I think hardware is different than software, and a lot of venture markets, some of them have learned that. Some of them are probably going to learn that. But, it's been my experience just over the course of the last 12 years running hardware businesses. My prior two businesses, Catalytic Innovations and Air Company, both hardware businesses. And before I went to school, before I went to college and grad school, I was in the software world. So I've kind of seen it from both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So I saw your LinkedIn post about these underwater unmanned vehicles, UUVs, I think you call them. Is this like a drone, underwater drone?
Yeah, so UUV is unmanned underwater vehicle. If you're trying to do something underwater, like do reconnaissance or try to find out what's going on under there, by your adversary or even a neutral party, using a UUV is a way to do that without putting service members in harm's way, and a way to do that in a low cost environment. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the major applications for UUVs, but one of the big challenges for them is how do you power them? And powering them, you could use fuel to power them, but then they could run out of fuel and then you have a stranded asset. You could use electricity to power them with a battery, but the battery also runs out, and once it goes, it's gone. It's very, very hard to recover these. You're not going to go down to the bottom of the sea to recover your UUV. Mm-hmm. The other option is to use, and we already do this, right, with our manned underwater vehicles, yes, or our nuclear submarines in the United States. We already actually use those nuclear submarines, we use nuclear power to power those submarines. And so that's been the way that we have historically been able to operate underwater for long periods of time. And that's the way that I think we're probably going to go for these unmanned vehicles as well. And that's what my business focuses on. So, we not only do this for UUVs, but for space applications as well as terrestrial applications, but building power sources. And those power sources are made using material that we recycle from spent nuclear fuel. Those power sources, they're called radiovoltaics. And you could imagine them as like a AA battery that lasts 30 years. And that's really, I would say, like the next step for operational energy. So we're focused on using those as replacements for batteries in these small applications. You could think of it as a much broader application in the future, not just operational energy for the military, but beyond that, we actually use these sorts of materials in our everyday life. You're sitting in a room, I'm sitting in a room, and I'm looking up at the smoke detector in my room. You're sitting in a room with a smoke detector in it as well, and that smoke detector has a little piece of americium-241. Americium-241 is an isotope recovered from nuclear waste. We don't recover it in the United States because we haven't recycled nuclear waste in probably a little north of 50 years. But you can get these isotopes from places like France, where they recycle nuclear waste today. So all of us are sitting in the room with a radioisotope-powered device. The americium-241 specifically powers the detector in your smoke detector. So americium spits out alpha particles. Those alpha particles are little helium nuclei. They hit a detector continuously, and that generates a current. Now, if you get smoke that goes up into your smoke detector, those alpha particles will hit the smoke instead of hitting the detector, and you won't get that same current generation in your
Mm.
smoke detector. So that's how we detect smoke. And right now, nuclear waste is sitting in all of our houses, keeping us safe. But that's not like a mainstream part of the narrative yet.
Yeah. And what about the radiation? Is it not dangerous?
No, so for americium, radiation is there are different types. Well, not all radiation is created equal. There's alpha radiation, which is what americium 241 emits predominantly, and those are little helium nuclei. Those can't go through a piece of paper. Alpha radiation stops very easily. Like your skin will very easily stop alpha radiation. Beta radiation, which is different from alpha radiation, is an electron that is flung out of a nucleus.
Mhm.
So beta radiation is also stopped relatively easily. Like if you ingest it, then it could cause problems. But again, your skin can stop it. Gamma radiation is the one that we are concerned about from a health perspective.
Mhm.
Now, gamma radiation can be used for medical treatments and is very effective when it's used in medical treatments, like to treat cancer. But gamma radiation is generally pretty bad because it goes straight through you. Gamma rays are little photons, and they're very high energy photons, so they can fly through you and they can cause damage to your DNA. A lot of the, I would say, like negative effects like, of any nuclear incident is really caused by gamma radiation more than anything else. Like Chernobyl, which is the famous one,
Yeah.
had cesium 137 polluting a lot of the countryside around Chernobyl, and cesium 137 is a very strong gamma emitter.
Mhm.
So gamma is what we try to avoid at Project Omega. We don't use gamma emitters for our power sources, and so all of our power sources are using the safer types of radiation.
That's fascinating. So, Saf, I'd like to switch gears here a little bit and go back to business. So, what drives growth in a business like yours, or specifically your business?
A lot of things drive growth. Our business right now, we work together with a lot of groups in national security. We're driven by the growth of the United States and we're driven by the growth of our economy. But beyond that, the demand for nuclear electricity has been very, very high, and that's driven a lot of growth for us as well. How do you generate enough electricity to power data centers and to power compute? And that's a huge problem in the world right now. A lot of people who initially invested in AI are pivoting to invest in energy actually because they're realizing the bottleneck for AI is not the chips, it's
Yeah.
the energy that's needed to power the chips.
Mhm.
And as people are building these new assets that are requiring all this energy, they're quickly realizing that nuclear is one of the best ways to fulfill all of these energy requirements. As the nuclear industry grows, we are seeing the need to reshore and bring back to the United States the nuclear fuel cycle. And so we stopped doing commercial enrichment, for example, a long time ago. And there are a lot of great companies that are working on commercial enrichment. We stopped doing recycling and reprocessing back in the 1970s. And we're bringing that back. We're one of the groups that are working on bringing recycling and reprocessing back to the United States
Mhm.
in a more responsible way than we did back then, because technology is undoubtedly and unarguably better today than it was in the 1960s and the 1970s.
Mhm. That's fascinating. So you're helping all these old economies, which are obviously in a new skin, recover here and manufacturing energy. So what's one thing that you're trying to figure out in your business right now?
So, one of the challenges that everybody in the nuclear industry faces right now is scale. There's a whole new group of reactors called small modular reactors,
Mhm.
advanced, and they, another colloquial term for those is advanced reactors. And figuring out how to scale those is one of the challenges. So we're working right now on scale. We're focused very heavily on scale and scaling up our process to be able to build these true infrastructure projects that will be able to ensure that the United States has a domestic nuclear fuel cycle going into the future. So that's really the main focus for all of us right now is scale and execution. So being able to not only scale our technology, but also be able to execute on the current scales that we operate.
Mhm.
So we work together on the execution side. We work together with two really great national labs, Idaho National Lab and Pacific Northwest National Lab. Execution in the nuclear industry is historically challenging to do, and working together with the government and with the national labs is a big value add because those national labs have the institutional memory and they have the experience of working with radioactive materials and working with nuclear materials that we're able to piggyback off of. And they have a lot of infrastructure as well that we're able to work with.
Yeah. And when you say scale, is it about scaling, energy generation or energy transmission or the manufacturing of equipment that utilizes the recovered nuclear fuel? Or is it also about scaling the organization in terms of managing the organization?
All of the above, all of the above. This time last year, we were pretty much one person, or this time last year, we were still a concept. And, we started the business in July last year. So this time last year, we were pretty much one person, and now we're close to 20. So we've already scaled by a lot just in the last year, but we probably need to scale by another order of magnitude by the time we get to next year. So big part of it is managing the growth of a high growth and rapidly moving organization. But then a big piece of it is also scaling energy in the United States, scaling transmission, scaling generation, scaling the production of nuclear fuel. Because right now we get a lot of our nuclear fuel for to 20% of the United States electrical grid is nuclear. So today we use a lot of nuclear electrons to power, as I mentioned, based on our locations, we're probably not using too many nuclear electrons right now. Or Steve, I don't know where you're calling in from.
I'm in Virginia, the capital of data centers.
I take it back. You're actually probably using nuclear electrons as we speak. So we need to scale that generation, but we also need to scale the fuel for those reactors. So the nuclear electrons that you're using to talk with me right now are most likely coming from Russian uranium. So uranium that we buy from Russia. There has been, I think your home country and many folks in Europe have learned that relying on Russia for your energy resources is not the greatest idea. And so we still, to this day, rely on Russia for a lot of our commercial uranium, for our commercial reactors. And that's something that we need to change. And so scaling our nuclear fuel cycle in the United States is a key aspect of what we're doing.
So what's really fascinating, we were on a vacation in Moab, Utah, just a few weeks ago, and we noticed that there was a lot of mining of nuclear materials there. Is this something that happened in the past, and essentially this industry wound down in the US, or there is still a mining of nuclear materials here?
So there's very little actual mining of uranium in the United States. I think something like 99% of our uranium comes from foreign sources. So there's not a lot of uranium mining. The management of nuclear resources in the United States, there is a good amount of nuclear work that's being done in Utah, but there are a handful of states that actually do the majority of the nuclear material legwork. Utah is one of them, I think. Idaho is the birthplace of nuclear energy, and so Idaho is doing a lot of work on the nuclear fuel cycle and nuclear management. Idaho is where all of the spent fuel for our naval fleet goes after at the end of life of carriers and submarines. That's public knowledge. You can look it up. There's a lot of work that's been done to make sure that all of that material is completely safely managed and managed very effectively. So Idaho is the birthplace of nuclear energy, and it's also where a lot of work in the nuclear fuel cycle is happening. That's actually the other state that we operate in at Project Omega. So Idaho is, I would say, one of the leaders in the nuclear renaissance that's happening right now.
Okay, so that's a really good point. So you're in Idaho. Where else are you in the United States? And what would you like your listeners to do when they hear about you? What are the people that you would like to get in touch with you?
Well, I'm calling in from Newport, Rhode Island right now. So Newport, Rhode Island is our headquarters. We have a laboratory that we operate that's down the street from here. So we have some operations in Rhode Island, and that's our headquarters. We also have our operations in Idaho, and that's where we're building some of our infrastructure. And we have a small contingent in the company that are in the DC area as well. We have other facilities as well in the company, but we keep those confidential. But publicly, we are Rhode Island headquartered, and we do a lot of work in Idaho and in the DC area.
That's fascinating. So if people get interested in hearing what you're doing and would like to get in touch with you or learn more about Project Omega, where should they go and where can they learn more?
I would go to projectomega.com. Info@projectomega.com is our main inbox. We keep a pretty good job of staying up to date with it. That's also what we use for careers and for hiring. And, as I mentioned, hiring is one of my top jobs. So, we're always interested in the best candidates out there that want to revolutionize the nuclear fuel cycle in the United States.
That's fantastic. So if you are interested in the nuclear industry and recycling nuclear fuel and drive the UUVs of the next generation, then definitely check out Project Omega website and reach out to staff. And if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you give us a follow and subscribe to YouTube and stay tuned because every week there's an exciting entrepreneur coming on the show. Staff, thanks for coming and sharing your wisdom and unique knowledge, and thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Steve. This was great.
I appreciate you listening today. Stay connected. Sign up for my free weekly newsletter at steveperido.com/newsletter.